that's it. I think we're off. So welcome. I hope you all had a fantastic week last week, and you didn't miss doing art too much. But we're gonna carry on this evening by we're going to keep developing our mountain landscape pieces that we've been working on. So if you remember, we've looked at a couple of different artists so far, and I've got another one to show you this evening. An artist that he started off as an impressionist, and he inspired a lot of impressionist artists. But then he moved more into the sort of Fauve area of art a little bit later on. But he's got a really beautiful way of using brush strokes and colour. So I thought that would be a really nice artist to look at and maybe be influenced by in the foreground, perhaps, of the painting. So if you remember, we've worked from the background, first of all, looking at Pissarro and the very small brush strokes that he does. And then we've moved forward looking at the directional kind of angular marks of Cezanne, which I'm still going to keep working on tonight. And then I've got this second or third artist called Armand Guillaumin. I did get the pronunciation last night because I actually looked it up on Google, but I've now forgotten it. I was just trying to look it up again, but Armand Guillaumin is his name. So and he did these fantastic colours, which struck me as being quite contemporary, as in the kind of colours that people are inspired by today as well. So I'm going to show you a few pieces of his work and maybe just talk a little bit about that. And then if you remember, we were painting over some of the ink drawings that we've been working on previously. So I'm going to continue with that today, and maybe next week start to introduce something new as well. But I realise that everyone is probably at different stages and stuff, so we'll keep working along the lines of that as well. So we'll go over to the studio wall, and I'll just talk through a few things. And then we can all get cracking with our paintings. Okay. Right, so as I mentioned a minute ago, we are looking at these landscapes, these beautiful mountain landscapes. And the idea of these was to show the idea of atmosphere and atmospheric perspective. So if you remember, as a little reminder, we've got this, the idea of having sharper detailed foreground. So we've got these beautiful rocks up here in the foreground. And then as we go back, the detail's still there, but it's not quite as sharp. But there's lots of like stippling and little sort of marks. And then as you go further to the back, it becomes much more muted, and maybe there's more blues and paler sorts of colours up towards the back. So the idea of that is that we start to create this sense of space and distance within the landscapes that we're looking at as well. Let's just switch that one off. Let's just switch. Yeah. I've got a couple of pictures here I didn't mean to put on. Let's just see. Oh, that's one of them. I put a load more on since then, you see, so let me just... Oh. I can't find that one at the moment. I'll find it in a minute. But anyway, if we go over to this one, you can see how I've developed this picture on a little bit further. I'm still working on it at the moment, but we looked at the Pissarro, as I mentioned, the Pissarro with the very small brush stroke. So this is more of a lighter photograph, but you can still see a lot of the very small brush strokes that I've included towards the back. If you remember as well, with acrylic paints, if you put a colour down, you can keep building on it and layering the colour to create more texture and so forth. And then as we move down here, we've got the Cezanne marks, which as you can see from this, they're all going in this kind of one angle. They're going upwards diagonally towards the top left, or sorry, top right as I'm looking at it. And then I started to put some colour into the water as well down the bottom, but I've decided to make it a bit more dynamic and think about the movement that Cezanne created with his geometric forms and his brush strokes. I'm not doing geometric forms here, obviously, but I'm doing the sort of more lineal brush strokes. The angle of the brush strokes go in a different direction to start to sort of get this kind of almost like zigzag movement, if you like, going up through the brush strokes of the water and then going the other way for the trees up there. So yes, we're combining some different techniques in different ways to explore these different artists, but also maybe to learn a little bit about how we can create these pictures as well. Now over here then is I got these out just to sort of show you again. I'll just move them up to the top because I can't get to anything here at the moment. Right, there we go. There we go. Right, so we've got this, everything's switched on at once. There we go. So we looked at some of these landscapes. So Cezanne has used these really strong oranges and greens in the foreground. The colours are still bright, but they're a little bit more faded in the background and there's less detail. So it still creates this lovely sense of distance. And even in the mountain, look, we've got a little bit of blue going on there as well. But the main painting that I was looking at for this was this rocky sort of picture, which is this one just over here. And I really found it inspiring how he had used all these very tiny diagonal brush strokes on here. So a lot of fun to sort of explore, perhaps mixing colours on the actual wet surface, so working wet on wet. So whilst you've got one colour down, you can mix in with another to create these different lovely blends of colour on there as well. Right, let me see if I can get the other bits up now. Okay, so if I turn, let's just turn that one off. Yes, I've done it. And we look at this new artist, although he's not such a new artist. His name was, as I mentioned, it's Jean-Baptiste Armand Guillaumin. I can't say it, but there's a few of his paintings, which I think are absolutely gorgeous for their wonderful color schemes and so forth. The one up here in the top corner, so let's just get the right one here. I didn't label them very well tonight. There we go. Right, so this one uses some wonderful colors here. So look at these beautiful purples. Now, the reason I chose this one is because I used a purple in the background of my own picture, and some of those colors end up coming through the brush strokes that I'm doing. But the nice thing about looking at this as well is this wonderful, these wonderful small brush strokes at the front, which create this wonderful detail. And also because they're going across, they also make the road feel kind of flat and even in a way, don't they? They give you a sense of the shape of the landscape as well. But they really help to sort of create this sense of space. And then at the back, you can see there's not as much detail again. And we've got these really lovely purpley blues, which really, once again, like we said, create this sense of space and distance, and such an atmospheric picture as well. And then some of the other one that I chose was this rocky one. You should see if I'll find the rocky one. This one. I'm just going to bring it up. So I chose this one because in my landscape I've got some rocks as well. So I thought this one would be quite useful to look at because it shows different textures. And there's also something quite interesting about the direction of the grasses. You see the grasses are sort of flowing around into the composition. And then we've got all these wonderful rugged marks on the rocks that have been built up. And they're quite contrasty. One of the things about rocks is you get these sharp, detailed edges, don't you? So when you put your paint down for those, you want to have the contrast between the areas that are getting the light and the deep shadows of the stonework as well. which is going to help you create that detail in the foreground, but also that rugged kind of effect as well on there. So I'm going to be exploring a little bit. Once I've done some more Cezanne stuff, I'm going to be exploring some of this artist's beautiful work. Now, later on, as I mentioned, he was inspired by the artwork of the Fauve artists, and I got a few of those to show you as well this evening. So I'm just going to lock a few others because they're all getting in the way. Okay, here we go. So you may have heard of these names as well. So we've got Andre Derain, and these so the Fauve artists were really famous for using these extremely vivid and bright colours in their composition. So again, this feels today really, really modern, particularly because we've got contrasting colours against each other as well. So you've got the blues and the oranges next to each other, which really pop out of the canvas. But this might be something that you could be interested in working with too, because again, like Cezanne used the repeated brush strokes, we've got the repeated brush strokes which create this pattern and texture, which really stands out. But then the nice thing is we've got the white coming through, which makes it feel very fresh at the same time as well. So again, the leaves are very detailed and the mountains are less detailed towards the back, despite everything being really, really bright. And then the next one is an artist that I haven't really paid much attention to over the years, but his name is Maurice Vlaminck as well, another really famous artist, and he was seen as being kind of the extreme as far as this Fauve art movement goes. But what again, wonderful amount of this accumulation of vivid brushstrokes. Yes, you can't see all the detail in there, but you can get a really nice sense of the movement and the energy that can be felt when we look at landscapes and things like that in nature. So I thought that was a really lovely one to look at as well. And then I've got another one by the same artist here, which is perhaps a little bit more easy on the eye, I guess. So just make that a bit bigger. And even though the brush strokes and everything on here are again quite busy and energetic, you've got very recognizable features within the landscape as well, which draw your eye and also help you to fit all those lovely shapes together. And if you look right in the background, next to the if we go to the left, you can see a tiny house and a little road coming up to the foreground where these the midground where these houses are, and then again a lot more detail towards the front as well. So whereas I may not be expecting you all to paint in this style, it's worth looking at because you can take things from this to put an experiment with in your own work as well. So we've got these with this one, with a sense of space again, we've got these warmer colours towards the front which ground you in the foreground. Then we've got these vivid greens and yellows, and then the pale blues towards the back. So you still, even now, get this sense of space within the picture. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to continue working with these artists. And then next week, I'll be perhaps introducing something new, although I'm quite keen to finish my own painting as well because I'm quite enjoying it. So we'll go over to the desktop and you can see where I am. So there's the Pissarro stuff at the back. As I mentioned before, here we've got the Cezanne, and then a bit further down I'm going to be looking at some of this Maurice Guillaumin. Okay. All right, so I'll talk through what I'm doing a little bit as I go, but I think that should do us for tonight. We'll carry on working on these. Be interesting to see how far everyone's got, so that I can gauge what to do with you next. Okay. So we started, or we carried on painting this mountainscape along with everybody else doing theirs as well, of course. And what I've done a little bit more on this video is slow down some of the footage so that you can maybe get a closer look at what I'm doing in different places on the composition here this evening. So this part of the video goes on just as long as the previous bit, the talking bit now. Speeds up and slows down at different rates according to what's going on. So just to sort of mention what I'm doing here. So I mentioned earlier that I was looking at the wonderful work of Cezanne and how he used these very directional and constructed lines or dashes of paint, which had this kind of, like I said, it had a directional feel to it, which worked really well for the midground of this picture. And then as I'm coming forward here on the river, at the back of the river, I changed the direction of the marks quite a lot. So chopping and changing. You can't see it that well on this little bit of footage here, but as I'm coming forward, I'm looking at the artist that we've been talking about this evening. I'm looking at his brush strokes and how they're a bit more kind of fluid and larger and things. So I'm doing that somewhat more here in the foreground where the river flows around and down through the rocks here. So smaller marks around there, and then you'll see that I start to add marks that are a little bit bigger towards the front. So what I'm doing at the same time here is I've both got the artist's work, Armand Guillaumin, got his work up on the screen, and I can also see the photograph. So I'm working from the photograph on the screen. Some people work from a phone as well. So, because it's nice with the phone, you can zoom in quite close, can't you, to what you're doing and things, to have a look at some of the detail. So here, going against what I often do is I've used a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of blue and a touch this time of black, so I can get right into the deeper tones. You do have to be a little bit careful with black because it can, if you start adding white, it can start to make the picture look dull. The colours go dull. But as you can see on the rock here, I've mixed kind of a little bit of blue and grey together, and I'm just building that in. One of the things that I emphasise with regards to rocks is that we've got these jagged edges on the rocks, which when the light hits them, of course, you've got strong outlines or strong highlights and deep shadows because of the nature and the shape of rocks. These rocks are a little bit smoother, so you do get some graduation, like on the rock that I'm doing at the moment. But there are also some sharp edges. So emphasizing those sharp edges by using strong white against dark shadows is going to help create that sense of shape and form within the landscape that you're creating. So, and I wanted a little bit more blue towards the back there as well to send it back a little way into the picture, but also thinking about how Armand uses strong colours in his work, particularly later on in his career where he was inspired by the Fauve artists. So I'm not doing that with this picture, but I am kind of taking that into account in the way that I approach work. Now, the other thing is on those shadows, I've added just a sort of scrape of some paler mixed colour to get that curve on the rock where I'm painting now. It's just a hint, like a slight hint of where the rock curves around the shape of the rock as well, or the shape of the curve of the rock goes around Now I'm using a lot of mark making here as well. So I'm using dots, I'm using small lines, and that's to add in more detail, to draw your attention or the viewer's attention, make it more interesting. And those marks might not exactly be there. They're part of my kind of language, if you like, of brush strokes and the way that I like to use the paint as well. So I don't get as far as I'd like to with this picture on this occasion, but I do kind of experiment a lot with the marks and the rocks. And here, look, I'm just adding some stronger accents of blue because I kind of like it. I think it looks interesting, and it kind of draws your attention to the rocks a little bit. Now you'll see me working around the river here and how it's tumbling through. So I've used a blue, obviously, but then I've started to add some thicker amounts of white with the brush back over the top too. Now the nice thing about painting like this is, of course, is that I've got this purple colour, violet colour underneath, and it's got all the details mapped out for me. It doesn't mean that I don't have to look at my photo anymore, but it does give me a really good idea of where I'm going to go next. It's an underpainting essentially in ink. And then I've worked back over the top with the paint, but some of those brush strokes, some of those purple bits come through the paint as well. So you get this kind of color that unites the picture from the very back to the front because you've got these little hints of purple. Now I slowed this down a little bit more because a couple of people said they wish the video would slow down a little bit sometimes so they could see how the brushwork, or how I do the brushwork on here. So I've slowed it down a lot. And so you can see how I gradually build up the surfaces of the picture or the rocks here. You can see I'm taking inspiration from the artist a little bit here again, doing these longer sort of brush strokes and so forth. But in a while, you'll see how I start to add even more marks on top. So I start to have a bit more fun with putting mark making on here. So this, even though this seems like it's in real time, it is actually speeded up a little bit. Just here. So you can get a sense of how the pace of what I'm doing a little bit more, perhaps. So again, I'm using the same sort of mixture for those deep tones, shadows in the rocks. Here I've added a touch of blue into that colour as well. So I've got that colour wet on my palette. And as I'm working, I'm creating different combinations. I'm trying not to let the colour get too pure, as in like primary or bright, straight from the tube sort of thing. And you see me here, just there, while the paint's wet, I'm also adding extra marks and textures by just flipping the brush over and scratching the surface somewhat too. Some of the things that I like to do often, which I don't do here today as well, is use another brush, even like a toothbrush, to scratch into the surface as well. So in a second, you'll see me. There we go. I've just cut forward slightly. You can see I've added some blue into that rock. And now I start to sort of really push things. I'm doing a bit of stippling in there as well. Zoomed in. There we go. Some dashes of lines in there.
So I'm constantly looking back at the photograph, as you can see, but I'm also using a little bit of my own kind of intuition, a bit of my own mark making that I like to do. And all the time, I've got this idea that I keep referring back to from our artist. There we go, some more marks in there. Those lines can give you a sense of the contours or the shape of the rocks as well. Those little pale dashes. And then there I am adding some slight details or accents into the rocks at the bottom. So, I mean, this work, you know, it took me a couple of hours to do the bits that I did, or a bit less than that because I was explaining the lesson. But as we've always said, you know, it's one of the reasons we do this as like an interest is because it is absorbing, and it just looking at things is very relaxing, and looking so intently at things is therapeutic, if you like, or it can be. Building into the rocks with some different tones there. A bit more shadow. Adding in a few of the highlights. And what I often do, as you can see me doing here, is I'm adding these highlights right on the tip of the rock where the shadow meets the edge of the rock and the light's hitting it. And that helps to really pull forward those, you know, jagged edges of the rock. So a nice light highlight against a really dark shadow is going to really bring that out. So in a short while, I start adding, working on this tree that you can see. She's right in the foreground. It's not a particularly big tree, or even a very pretty one, I suppose, but it's got lots of leaves. It's got some deep shadows, which I put in at the beginning. And then I start working with the highlights, bring back in some shadows, and then think about adding some stronger color as well. So you'll see that happening in a little bit. Here we go. So I'm kind of stippling or daubing a deep green color into this. So where the light isn't getting to the inside of the tree. And this can take time. It can be a bit, I suppose, a bit disconcerting because you've got to think of the tree as a whole rather than the individual leaves. Think of it as a 3D form that you're going to sculpt with lots of very small leafy stipples. So you've got to have a thought of the whole view of the whole of the tree. So we're adding in some of those. You can see the tree just down there in the corner. So I'm just building it up. Now this is wet on wet as well. So the paint underneath, the paint that I'm putting on is wet, still wet while I'm working into it. So I've gone back to the darker bits as well. This is all speeded up a bit, of course. So some of the marks there get a bit indistinct. So, and as you can see on the tree, there's some quite light areas on there. So I've gone almost white to bring, like with a rock, so contrast against really dark areas and really light areas. Bring it out a bit more. Just talking about painting rocks and things. Oh gosh, I've gone back now to doing a little bit of work on that river. There we go. So you can see it's starting to take shape. And the other thing that I do in a little bit is I look at the silhouette of this tree. So you can see how dark it is around the outside of the rock towards where my thumb is on the bottom left-hand side. There's quite a shadow around that on the photograph. So I've got more of a softer grey in the greyish green in there, and then I've started to add some more highlights as well. Starting to get something a little bit closer. I remember thinking I wasn't overly happy with it. This was quite interesting. You can see how his marks have been layered up. So if you're at home and you've got this picture, you could have a closer look by zooming in on your phone or on a PC. Now I've started to think a little bit there, look, about those lovely blues or some brighter colours. And there's the silhouette that I'm bringing in around the tree. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next lesson. Have a good time. Bye.